So far we have found trig values of angles that are in a quadrant. Now we're going to look at what to do if you are asked to find a trig value of a quadrantal angle. So if you remember, quadrantal angles, they don't have a reference angle. Okay, so what we do is we look at a point that represents where that angle falls. So if I look at each of these 4 points, one on each part of the x and y axis. Okay, so this point is 1, 0. That's because we went to the right 1, up nothing. Here we went over 0, up 1. Here I went left 1. Here I went down 1. Okay, and the reason we use 1, 0 is it's just the simplest point to use. Otherwise, we'd be reducing. So if we use 1 and 0, our hypotenuse is always going to be 1. Remember, the hypotenuse is the distance from the origin to the point. So if we were using points other than 1, like if I were to use 2, 0, that means my hypotenuse would be 2, and then I just would be doing all this reducing. So that is why we use 1, 0, 0, 1, etc. for our quadrantal angles. Okay. So now when we were looking at a non-quadrantal angle, our adjacent side right here, that was always the x value. So anytime you're looking for something adjacent, you're looking at the x value of the point. The opposite side, that was always the vertical, so that always went with the y value. Okay, like if we were describing this point, the adjacent side was always along the x-axis, the opposite side was always moving along the y-axis. So adjacent will always go with x, opposite will always go with y. So when you're looking at a point, since cosine is adjacent over adjacent over hypotenuse, adjacent we know is x, our hypotenuse, since we're using these 1, 0 points, our hypotenuse will always be 1. Okay? So when you're looking at a point, the x-coordinate is always the cosine value, the y-coordinate is always the sine value. And then when you're going to find something like tangent, if you remember from your trig identities, tangent is sine over cosine. Well, I know sine is y, cosine is x. Or you can think adjacent. Tangent is not adjacent over opposite, it is opposite over adjacent. So we know opposite always goes with y, adjacent always goes with x. So let's look at some quadrantal angles. Okay, we've got sine of pi. Well, pi is on the left side. Okay, so that point, since I went left, is negative. So that's going to be negative 1, 0. Okay. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Okay, opposite is y over your hypotenuse is always going to be 1. Okay, so if I look here, the y value of that point is 0. So 0 over 1 is just going to be 0. Then when we do tangent of negative 3 pi over 2, so that's negative 1.5. Remember, the pi's over 2 are always going to fall on the y-axis. The whole numbers will always fall on the x-axis. So since this is negative 1.5, I'm going to go negative 1.5. So that point is up 1. So my y-coordinate would be 1. So remember, tangent, that's opposite over adjacent. Opposite is y. Adjacent is x. So that's going to be 1 over 0. Okay, we cannot divide by 0. When you divide by 0, that is undefined. So when you're finding a trig value, if you divide by 0, your answer is undefined. Okay, the tangent at negative 3 pi over 2 is undefined since we're dividing by 0. If you have 0 on top, that's just 0. Now, cosecant of 7 pi over 2. 7 pi over 2, that is 3.5. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3.5. So this is down 1, so that'll be negative 1. Okay. So cosecant goes with sine. Okay. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so cosecant is going to be hypotenuse, which is always 1 for quadrantal ones. So for quadrantal, the hypotenuse will always be 1. So that'll be hypotenuse over opposite, which is y. Well, my y-coordinate is -1, so that's 1 over -1, which is just -1. Then our last one, cosine of 0, so that's just on the right side. Remember, when your angle measures 0, that means you haven't rotated anywhere, so you're just at your starting spot. Okay? So that's right 1, so this point will be 1, 0. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent is x, the hypotenuse is always 1. So if I look at my x-coordinate, it's just 1. And again, with these quadrantal ones, like with the non-quadrantal ones, we had you draw the triangle and label the sides of the triangle. For any time it's a quadrantal angle, we're going to look at your point and that it's accurately labeled, and then your answer.